Hey, how are you, friend? So good to see you, and I'm so glad you're here. You want a cup of coffee? I thought we could just sit down and have a chat. Come on. Well, hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Coffee Friends Today. I'm your host, Marcia Faith Harper. And today is going to be a little bit different for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I don't have a guest this week. This is one of the things about having majority of your friends in different time zones, and also having the majority of your friends be incredible, busy, creative, inspiring people who have a lot on their plates. Sometimes you can't get two people on the same Zoom call at once, and that is okay, because it gives me a chance to just spend some time one-on-one with you. The other reason that today is cool is because we get to dive into something that I'm really passionate about, which is creative writing. And I want to approach this from a little bit of a different perspective. I want to approach this from the angle of trying to determine and write down your life story, where it started, what's happened so far that has brought you to this point, and the most important part, the thing that I hope you get out of it, and the thing that I've really been seeking lately, is determining where that story is going, where you want it to go. What is your happy ending? So we're going to dig into that a little bit today. And I want to encourage you, if you're listening along, grab a piece of paper or a notebook, grab a pen or a laptop or whatever your preferred method of note-taking is. We're going to do a little bit of a workshop writing down your life story. We're going to use a 12-chapter story structure that I learned in high school through a bit of curriculum called the One-Year Adventure Novel. It's an incredible curriculum to go through. So grab a notebook, grab a pen, and put on your writing cap. We're going to write your life story down. You ready? Let's go. What do you want your life story to look like? What is your ideal happy ending? This is a question I love to ask people when I'm getting to know them, because it's such an interesting conversation starter. And I always love the responses that I get. And I usually get responses that fall into two categories. Either someone who has an incredibly intricate idea, a very solid idea of what they want their life to look like at the end. Or I get this kind of deer in the headlights, caught off guard response of, I don't really know. Both of those answers are completely valid. Today, as we delve into this whole thing, we have to start the way any good writer starts the story building process. We have to start with the character's motivation. For the purpose of this whole workshop, you're going to think of yourself as the main character. And I want to do that to kind of bypass any hangups you might have about your own motivation, any discomfort you might have of looking directly at your own story. It helps to detach yourself just enough to gain a wider perspective and be a little bit more objective when you're thinking about what you're working with. Every good writer starts off with figuring out what the main character is trying to do. What is their ultimate goal? If the main character could write their own happy ending, what would it be? So, the first thing that you're going to write down, and this might take you several minutes, or you might have to come back to this episode after a little bit of reflection. Write down what gets you up in the morning. Write down what your ultimate happy ending would look like in as much specific detail as possible. If your happy ending, if the thing that you want more than anything else in the world is something like to be happy, I want to challenge you to dig a little bit deeper. Be specific. What does happiness look like to you? Is it owning your own Fortune 500 company and living in a penthouse apartment? Is it traveling the world? Is it working from home so you can spend time with your family? Is it just having a family? What is it? What does it look like to you? What do you want? And is it something that you can work toward and really do? That's where the majority of your story comes from. And that's what the majority of your story is made of. You doing what you need to do to get what you want. All right, so I'm going to have you pause the episode here, take out your pen, put your thinking cap on, be very honest with yourself and be specific. What is it that you want more than anything else in the world? You ready? Go. Every year on my birthday, I get a phone call from my mom. And she tells me the story of the night before and the day that I was born. And it usually starts with something along the lines of 24 years ago tonight, I was sitting in a hospital room with your 3 older siblings, and I was wondering who I was going to meet, who they would grow up to be, what their personality would be like, if they would have black hair like mine or red hair like your dad. And I was so excited to meet you. That's the prologue of my story. That's well before anything I can remember. This is what we call stasis, the way things were before, or the prologue, if you will. Take a couple of minutes as you're sitting there with your notepad and write down just a few of your earliest memories. It can be bullet points, where you came from, and a few of the things that defined your life before you feel like it really got started. And you may not have a great idea of what that looks like right now, and that's okay. You can define it and fine-tune all of this later. That's what the editing process is for. But write down who your parents were, where you were born, where you were raised, how you were raised, a little bit about your background, because it determines so much of your personality and your decision-making later on. So just a brief couple of sentences, a few bullet points of your backstory and your background, your upbringing. Came from a loving family, the youngest of 4 siblings, and I grew up in South Georgia. That's mine. All right? Shouldn't take you too long. Meet me back here when you're done. Okay, so you got what you want. We're not quite ready to jump into chapter 1 yet, though, because I need you to go a little bit deeper, and I need you to write down the thing that you most dread, the thing that you most fear. What is the thing that holds you back every single time you want to make a decision or take a step forward? I know that is a very deep, very uncomfortable question, but it's going to help you a lot. Whenever you find that your story has kind of gone off the rails, 9 times out of 10, you can trace it back to responding to whatever was in front of you out of fear or dread, usually of kind of the same brand. So take a second. Don't dwell on it for too long. We've got a long way to go. Write down what that fear is. What are you so afraid of? All right? Take about 30 seconds for this one. All right, you got it? All right, I know that was hard, so take a deep breath. I know it's easy when you think about ways that you may have held yourself back to be angry with yourself. And I want to encourage you that if that's the way you're feeling, forgive yourself. It's not your fault entirely. Because a lot of that fear comes from a place of very real negative experiences, suffering that you have gone through. But we can't stay caught up in the past because the past is prologue, right? We have to learn what we can from that. We have to determine what chapter we're in so we can figure out where we are, kind of the you are here on our roadmap. We have to do something about what we can control, and we have to determine what we are going to do to get where we really want to be and do the things we really want to do. Now in the margin, I also want you to write down some names of the supporting cast of your story. Who are the most significant people in your life and kind of what role did they serve? Were they just a friend, a travel companion? Were they a mentor? Were they a nemesis? Were they kind of the comic relief that you needed? Write down the names of the most significant people in your life and how they affected your story. Every story needs a good old-fashioned villain because we can't have an interesting story without conflict. I want you to go back to your section on dread and fear and what you wrote down. That, in most circumstances, is going to be your villain because we are our own worst enemies. And we hold ourselves back based on things that we're afraid might happen. Your villain might also be a person in your life that was very toxic to you. Maybe it's someone who is continually toxic to you. But I want to caution you against vilifying them completely. Because no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Here's what I want you to think about when you're thinking about your villain. Whether that is an idea, whether that is a person, whether that is a set of circumstances that you feel like you can't get out of. It's very easy to feel defeatist when you know that there is something that is up against you. Your mission is to be better than the villain. Your mission is to fulfill your goal and get to the place where you want to be in spite of that. Okay? Focus on what you really want to do, not necessarily on destroying them. It's a lot easier to actively do something positive than to not do something negative. Does that make sense? All right. Just want to throw that in there. all this, you should start to see a little bit of a theme emerging, or maybe a handful. Maybe you can't quite put your finger on it yet, but there's something in the background, some overarching theme to all of this. And as that starts to make itself a little bit more clear to you, I want you to write it down either in the margin or at the top of the page, wherever you have some space on your page, and write down kind of what maybe those themes are. And maybe you already kind of know. Maybe there's a quote or a word that you feel like kind of sums up your story so far. If you don't have it, that's okay. It'll come out of the woodwork. I just want you to be on the lookout for it. All right, so we've done all this preliminary work, right? We've talked about what you want. We've talked about where you came from. We've talked about your villain. We've talked about a lot of different things. And we still haven't gotten to chapter 1. How frustrating is that, right? Wrong. This is actually the groundwork that your story is built upon. This is the foundation. And from what you've already written down on your page, you can extrapolate a synopsis, a general idea of who you are, where you came from, what you want, and what's stopping you. That's a whole story right there. The rest is just plot. So take a second and write that paragraph. Who you are, where you came from, what you want, and what's stopping you. All right, let's get into the good stuff. Chapter 1. Chapter 1 we call the inciting incident. It's the moment where either you arrived in a brand new town at a brand new school, or you saw a frog for the first time and knew you wanted to be a scientist, or it's the moment where you looked around and thought to yourself, nothing is ever going to be the same. Whatever that moment was for you, it probably happened a while ago, because you've come a long way since then. So I want you to think back, and it might be something that happened when you were a kid. It might have been something that happened to you last month or 6 months ago, heaven forbid. I mean, the inciting incident of this year, I feel like, was sometime in February, and we've had probably an entire series since then. What was that moment for you? Was it the moment you stepped out on stage for the first time and knew that you wanted to be an actor? Was it the moment that you met the person that you ended up marrying? Was it something else entirely? If you could look back and pick one moment, what started it all? Different main characters have a different experience with this. Sometimes it's a choice where they decide that they're going to do something with their life, or that they're going to run away from home, or that they're going to ask that person on a date. For some people, that first inciting incident, unfortunately, is a traumatic moment. And it doesn't have to be something that's super dark and super personal, and I certainly don't want to force you to go back into anything that might be triggering today. But I just want you to understand that all of our stories start at the place where they start in our minds. Our narrative starts in the place where we kind of continue to go back to for a reason, because it made a big impact on you. My inciting incident of how this whole story got started was in February of 2013, when I was 16 years old and I walked into the Springer Opera House in Columbus, Georgia for the first time. And I met a man named Ron Anderson, and I fell in love with theater. That's my inciting incident. That's when I first thought, this is what I really want out of life. This is the path that I really want to be on. Your inciting incident might not be entirely a positive one where you knew what you wanted. It might have been a loss where you thought nothing is ever going to be the same. It might have been a hard lesson that you had to learn. Or it might have been a moment where you looked around and said, I don't know what I actually do want, but it's not this. Take a few moments and write down what that inciting incident was. I want to give you a couple of examples in literature of kind of what that chapter 1 might look like. Lucy Pevensey walks into a wardrobe during a game of hide and seek with her brothers and her sister and finds a magical land and meets a faun named Tumnus. Anne Shirley sits on a train station platform and is taken home to be adopted by Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert. Frodo is given a ring by his uncle. Mrs. Bennet tells her husband that Netherfield Park is let at last, and that this might finally be the chance for one of her daughters to marry a rich man. And that's all chapter 1 is. If you want to go into more detail and actually write this out as a story at some point, I feel like that would be really fun. So if chapter 1 is the what happened, chapter 2 is and how did that affect things? It's that moment where your character is reeling from that inciting incident. It's that culture shock moment. The moment where your main character is adapting to change while also trying desperately to cling to what was normal before. One of the reasons why we get so anxious when things change, even if it's a positive change, is because our brains are wired to keep us safe. This is the chapter where your brain is trying so hard to get you back to stasis. Sometimes that chapter is a day and a half, and sometimes that chapter takes most people the majority of their lives. Really just depends on how you choose to respond to change and how you teach your brain to respond to the anxiety of things are not going to be the same anymore. Take a couple of seconds, write down what the fallout, either positive or negative fallout was of that moment for you. What went through your head? A lot of times it's what you want. That want is going to come up over and over and over again because it's the thing that drives your story. Maybe you're in that second chapter. As we go through all of this, I want you to put a star next to any of the places where you feel like you might be, and it might be more than one, and that's okay. Sometimes we're in more than one phase at the same time because life is complicated and it's not always linear. So I want you to kind of determine what episodes or what chapters you might find yourself in right now. Take a second and write that down. All right, chapter 3. This is one of my absolute favorite parts of the story. It's the end of Act 1. We have been introduced to the main character. We've gotten to know a little bit about their background, what their life has been like before. We've seen them reeling from this massive change in their life. And now we're at the moment where they've gone a little ways down the road. They've gone down the approach trail, and now they're looking at the big journey. And they have to decide if it's worth it. If the thing down at the end of the path is worth all the work and all the exhaustion and the rocks and the blisters and the creatures that they're going to have to fight along the way, and the arguing with their traveling companions, and the trying to get away from the villain. And is it worth it? You might be in that moment right now. And if you are, congratulations. This is the most courageous moment of your life. Because the rest is just repeating, making the same decision. As we go through the rest of the story, you'll see that we're going to come up against more obstacles, and we're just going to keep making the decision that yes, it's worth it to keep going forward. Yes, we have to keep going forward. This is the moment where Frodo steps forward and says, I will take the ring to Mordor. He doesn't know a thing about what he's up against. And what he does know, he has no idea how he's going to get through it. But he makes the decision anyway, because at the end of the day, it's worth it. Because what's at stake is, for him, all of Middle-earth. And for you and for me, what's at stake is our life story. Is it going to be something that you're happy with at the end of your life? And maybe there's more of a stakes to it than that for you. Maybe you know that if you don't make this decision, you're going to be stuck in generational habits that you don't want to pass on to the next generation. Maybe it's something else. Whatever it is, it's worth it. If you've already lived through this moment where you came to the crossroads and you said, yeah, this is scary, but I'm going to take the leap anyway, because I know that that is what I want. I'm so freaking proud of you. Take a moment and write down what that decision looked like and what that moment was. This is another one of those moments chapters. So we just had chapter 2 where we're kind of going back and forth about, well, I want it to be this way, but I'm used to it being this way. And your brain kind of fighting that out. Chapter 2 sometimes can take years. It's the data gathering and the deliberation. Chapter 3 is the hardest decision you've ever made. And when you made it, you knew you were right. All right, you ready? Take a second and write that down. Whew. I don't know about you, but I could use a little bit of a break right about now. We've done so much work, you guys. We have done all of the setup work for our story. We've laid the groundwork of who we are, where we came from, our whole prologue. What we want more than anything else in the world, our main motivation. And we've determined what's stopping us. We've gone through the first chapter, the inciting incident that kicked off our entire life narrative. We've talked about the deliberation period of chapter 2, where we were trying to figure out if this is what we really wanted or if we wanted to go back to what was comfortable. And then we've made the decision in chapter 3 that no matter what, this is what we want and it's going to be worth it. We've gotten through Act 1 of the 12 chapter structure. And since we've done all that work, and I know your brain is tired and maybe you're feeling a lot of emotions right now, I'm going to end this episode here and we're going to pick up with a part 2 in a little while. take a step back away from the canvas. Call somebody if you need to. This is a lot of deep work that you're doing right now. And it's the big picture. I just want to tell you how proud I am of you. And thank you so much for making it this far with me. When we come back, we're going to get into Act 2. Act 2 is a lot longer than Act 1. It's chapters 4 through 9. And we're going to dig into all of that. But for now, get up, shake it out, get a glass of water, get a cup of coffee, acknowledge yourself for the work that you did today. You did some really cool reflection on who you are as a person, and maybe you learned a little bit about yourself. I know whenever I go through this from this perspective, I get a little bit of a reality check. But isn't it cool? And isn't your story amazing? All right, I'll see you back here next time. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you later, my friend.